the first round. We signed together last week. Last week I was in a play playing Fannie Lou Hamer. That's one of the I was thinking about to see that. So yeah, it's good to be with you, and I thank you for the opportunity to be here, for the work that is being done. And I'm going to try to, I'm a Black preacher, but I'm going to still try to finish in 15 minutes, so there's a little bit of time for us to engage. Because I can tell you what I know, but to know what really this group needs to hear or where we need to go, you've been here the whole time and you know. So I'm going to try to do 15 minutes of me talking and then 15 minutes of us engaging. And I know I'm the last thing at the end of the day, so I'll try to, I will honor that time even as a preacher. So I am a preacher, I'm a spiritual leader, but I am also a little bit of a science fiction comic book head. And I wanted to think today about this question of where we are, where we need to go, and then how we're going to get there. And so you all, I know, have been talking deeply about this question of the food system. That sort of basic thing that we need to live. And it's funny because I often ask people, what are the things we need to live? And sometimes it takes people a couple moments, but I think this room should know. So what are the things that human beings actually need to live? Water, food, air, and shelter. There's only 4: water, food, air, and shelter. Although somebody did say love, and I was like, it's so true. We definitely need love. There is evidence that if you leave a baby and you give it all of those things, but it doesn't have love, it will lose its desire to live. And so I put love as the 5th element that we do need. But there are those 4 elements that we need to live. And we are in this moment in which we are recognizing that the very, very things we need to live may not be there for us in perpetuity. And for me, I think about that moment in the science fiction movie where they're like, the aliens are coming. And you're like, we may not make it. Or it could be aliens, it could be an asteroid. There's a number of different movies that kind of tell the same story. Something is coming that could be the total annihilation of the human race. And there's these moments in the movie where certain things kind of happen, and they're somewhat predictable. There's the temptation to deny it, so then there's the people who say it's coming and the people who say it's not as bad as we think, and then there's the hero scientist who's like, no, don't listen to these people, I know what's really going on, it's really coming. And then there's those who are in power squabble over whose country should be in charge, and they pretend like they're working together, but secretly they have this side project that they're doing that they're not telling the other people about. You know it's true. And then, as the populace gets really clear about it, the conversation started about who's to blame, right? And then what kind of people we don't have enough resources to help. Sound familiar? It's crazy, right? And so the reality is, we as a human species are working out right now all of the emotional drama that you see in the first 15 minutes of any one of these films or comic books, right? We are recognizing that the way we have been living and the things that we have been doing, if we continue down this path, we are facing a not very bright future. And we have an opportunity right now, and I mean right now, like today, this year, in this moment, to make some deep decisions about who we are going to be. And whether or not we will face this moment and decide to evolve, or if we will go gently into the night. And I say this because many of you know I work a lot on issues of climate change. It's probably the core thing that I work on. And I say to people all the time, this is not a scientific problem, this is a spiritual problem. Amen. The problem is that faced with what it actually requires to live, we are choosing an economic system that's not about that. Faced with the reality that we need water to live, we have chosen oil. And so history that inevitably, if we're still around in 100 years, will be a moment that we think about, that we write about, that we tell stories about what we did in this time. And whether we chose to come together and rethink and reorient and reimagine who we are, or whether we allowed for many of our brothers and sisters to die. Okay, so it's real heavy. I think about these things on a daily basis, and I tell people, when people are like, how do you deal with that? I have a good cry at least once a week, at least once a week. This week it was less about the climate and more about the United Methodist Church and the Catholic Church and where we are as a church universal institution, not being where I wanted to be. But the reality is that EJ communities, indigenous communities, folks who have been on the front line of the externalities that we've been talking about for decades, have been sounding the call for a long time. And when it was just about, a little bit extra cancer in some communities in North Carolina, when it was about maybe they won't have enough water in India, I guess they should just stop having kids. When it was just about, those people in the Amazon, I know they want that land, but really, they're standing in the way of progress. When it was those folks, we didn't want to hear. But now, we've come to a point where everybody has to recognize that we are in this boat together. And it's true, some people are hurting right now, some people will hurt more, some people will struggle more, but the reality is, ain't none of us going to escape this, trying to hold together this system as it already is. And within that, I also want to remind us that technology will not save us. It is a part of the equation, but we are not going to just make EV SUVs and fix it. I want to say that we are in a moment where nothing will suffice but a radical shift away from a lifestyle that has been built on extraction and exploitation. And while this is a scary moment, it is also, in my opinion, one of the most amazing opportunities for the human species. Yes. As a person who's been an activist from the time that I was pretty young, I have to say I haven't been enamored with this system that much to begin with. And the idea that not just me as the crazy person at the lunchroom table being like, yo, we need to, right? But everybody might say it's time to walk away from this is probably one of the most exciting things that I've heard in a long time. The idea that I will not just continue to be called the crazy radical, but people might be like, there might be something to this economic injustice thing we've been talking about. There might be something to this idea that you can't just consume and consume and consume endlessly. And so we have an opportunity in this moment to recognize that one of the scariest things that we're facing is also one of the potential greatest opportunities that we have to reimagine who we will choose to be. I don't know how many of you have read Margaret Wheatley's book, Who Do We Choose to Be? Leadership, and then she talks about a need to create sanity, sane leadership in the midst of this crisis. So I want to say that there are three things I think we need to embrace to get there. The first is creativity. Because if we're all honest, I love this, a music artist has said, he said, I've been talking to a lot of people, and the one thing I realized is nobody knows what they're doing. And it was just this moment that was a beautiful, we don't have all the answers. If anybody tells you they have the answer to the crisis that we're in, yeah, no, none of us knows exactly how to get from where we are to where we need to be. And so we need amazing creativity in this moment to help us reimagine what our world could look like, who we are called to be in that world, how we might create communities that take care of each other, that don't commute tons of hours, where parents, whoa, crazy idea, actually are able to be home with their children. Where children recognize that tomatoes come from plants and not the grocery store. There's an opportunity to reimagine our society on such a fundamental level, and it will take creativity unlike what we have never unleashed before to imagine where we are going. So I challenge you to get ready to experiment and to fail and to dream and to cry and then redream again. Because that is the work we are called to as creative beings trying to understand where we go from here. Second thing I think we have to embrace is collaboration. Because ain't nobody going to figure this out on their own. At some other time, we can have a whole conversation about nation states and that model of thinking and being. But the idea that you can draw a circle around who's your people and who's not your people, that ain't real, y'all. Because the hurricane don't care who's your people and who's not your people. Right? And so this idea of collaborative work that opens our hearts and that opens our minds to what we can learn from each other and then puts our hands to the plow together will be absolutely essential for our survival. And finally, we will need courage. You knew what was going to be, see, I'm glad you had to do this. 3 points in alliteration is a must. Courage, because the reality is, if you don't know where you're going and you've got to make big decisions, you got to be willing to step out there and put yourself out there. And if we try to play it safe, as many political leaders are telling us, I know it can get past. But if what can get past ain't going to save us, is that enough? So we will need an unprecedented level of courage to face this reality and to recognize that sometimes we will win and sometimes we will lose. There is pain in front of us. But there also are amazing opportunities, and we have to have the courage to walk into those three. And finally, I want to just say really quickly who I think the likely heroes are in this story. They are not the president or the military. They'll have a role to play, but they are not the heroes in my story. The first set of likely heroes I have are young people who have been formed by this reality. They never grew up in a time where the collapse of the world was not a possibility. They recognize that they are fighting for their lives. I love my elders, but I have heard some of them say, like, wow, that's so far away. I'm not going to live to see that. Let me go get this SUV. Right? All right. Young people who know, people who are going to be alive in 2080, are going to take this much more seriously than people who are like, well, oh my God, doesn't get flooded. And I think that young people are also inclined to boldness in a way that we need in this moment. And so they will not do everything perfectly. They will make mistakes. They will force it sometimes. But we need the energy of young people as heroes in this moment. Second group I want to call out are frontline folks. Folks that already been trying to learn how to make $1 out of 15 cents might have a lot of solutions for us in this moment. Folks who have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Folks who are living the reality every day of hunger, of water shortages, of sea level rise. Those folks are unable to deny because they're living it. And finally, I would say people of radical, loving faith. Because radical faith, when you put them together, it conjures a certain image, so I want to be clear. Radical, loving faith. People who believe in miracles, because I don't know about y'all, but we need one. People who are grounded in the face of really tough times. And folks who know how to turn to the examples of ancestors who kept hope even in insurmountable situations. I speak all the time and people go, how do you have faith? How do you keep moving? And I say, I remember the fact that my great-great-grandmother prayed for me, and she knew she wasn't getting out of slavery. She knew that the chance for her life to be better or different was close to zero. But she imagined into the future a me that she couldn't even see in her mind's eye, but she believed I would exist. Her faith is in my DNA.
Come on. Amen. Come on.
be. The truth is that many indigenous communities really hold all three of these. They have not sold out to the system that told them that I just ended up listening to this whole piece about the Dakotas. At some point, if you want to listen to it on This America Life, how the Dakotas got down and this, anyway. But the reality is there are many people who for hundreds of years knew this system was corrupt, have continued to speak that even when it has not been heard, have continued to stand even sometimes when their lives and lands were taken. So I look at this movie, and in the Hollywood version we always win, right? I'll be honest, I don't know what the ending is definitely going to be. If you ran the statistical models of where we are as a people, who we have been in the past and what we're up against, I'm going to be honest, the statistical likelihood is not where I would turn for hope. And yet, I come from folk that have hoped against hope. That's right. That's right. Who have stood against time, who continue to live in the face of massive suffering and disregard for their lives. So my challenge to all of us is to tap into that spirit. Choose to mobilize and survive. And to imagine now the stories that our great-grandchildren will tell. The time when we decided to love deeply, to focus on the things that really matter, and to save ourselves. Thank you. To help bring this together as this closes.
I guess you kind of did speak to this just now, but I guess what do you say to people who are afraid of change?
Yeah.
And I guess questioning why they might be afraid of that change. Where does it start, that fear? I don't know.
Yeah. So that's so human. When people look at climate change and are like, why can't we get it together? I'm like, girl, for the same reason we always can't get it together. There's a whole bunch of what we're facing here that is so human. In the face of radical shift, a lot of us shut down. Think about the last time you needed to make a radical shift, even in your group. And you was like, oh, this relationship ain't working. How long did it take you to really... the reality is, knowing that something isn't working doesn't necessarily mean that we will step out and do what we have to do. So I'd say a couple things. I think as a movement, one, we need to make sure we are meeting people who are ready immediately when they are ready, right? Because sometimes there's a lot of folks who do care, and we don't reach out to them. We don't have conversations with people. One of the things that is annoying about, I hear a lot of people being like, community, I'm a community organizer. And they mean that they just go to meetings. Right? So I think part of it is creating spaces of engagement is really, really important because one, I believe there are more people that are ready to shift than are being engaged because of the way that this world can be kind of insular, right? People may not know what food justice is, but they know he's hungry, right? So, I ask myself, if we care about food justice, why aren't we going to food pantries? If you want to organize, why wouldn't you start with people who already know the food system isn't working for them, as an example, right? So that's one thing I think is a critique on our side. The other piece of it is, for me, I walk a very fine line between being very honest about the challenges that we face and also being very excited about the possibilities that are in front of us. And I think I've been going to I'm giving an interview for this thing about climate communication and people trying to analyze it. I'm like, yeah, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but we should look at the data and all of that. But this is like an old preacher trick. Like, you say the bad stuff first, and then you finish up with the good stuff, right? Like, here's all the ways you mess it up. Hooray, Jesus, this is all coming together, right? Like, right? Real talk. So we need our work to hold both the tension of the real hard stuff and the opportunities. I think there's a lot of people who would love to be home more. So telecommuting, for instance, in terms of like reducing emissions, is also an opportunity to reestablish family connections and family units because people don't have to spend 2 to 3 hours of their time commuting back and forth to someplace, right? So I think sometimes the best selling points to change may not be the things that as environmental people we are most interested in. They are things that are about people's quality of life that can improve. I work with an organization that has one group working on a child care campaign and another crew working on climate change. And I'm always asking, why aren't we trying to figure out where the intersection of child care and climate change is? If we can find opportunities for change that solve multiple problems that people are facing at the same exact time, that's something I'm going to be much more excited about than something that you tell me to change and all I can see in that is the sacrifice. I don't see any of the benefit in it. And I think one of my big messages to the environmental community is it can't all be about parts per million and reduction of, height over fertilization, right? It also needs to be about really good strawberries in your backyard that your children, you know what I mean? When we start offering people beautiful things that we've lost, in addition to dealing with the shifts that are required, that's a very different proposition. I think if we put the two together, I know Kanana's doing a lot of work around, I'm also a gardener too. People like the opportunity in the soil. I let all my God kids take off their shoes. They're excited about that. Take off their shoes and get their feet dirty in the soil. Because how many of us never had the opportunity to do that? If you grew up in the city, you was like, go take your shoes off, you're gonna get your feet cut out of the glass, right? And so we've never had that, right? But there's healing in that soil. And so I think we are as much walking towards something better as we are walking away from something that's not working for us. Yes?
Yeah, hi. I just thank you. I'm just going to be loud.
Okay.
I just wanted to, I love that you emphasize the young people, and I just wanted to mention Greta Thunberg, the Swedish girl
Yes.
who has been doing that work in Europe, and tens of thousands of kids every Friday going on school strikes.
And March 15th, here in Massachusetts, from 11 to 3 at the State House.
Exactly.
Just if you wanted to apply, young people will be doing the Massachusetts climate strike, and it would be great for everyone to come out in solidarity. I'm not doing anything but showing up in solidarity. I mean, they may tell me to do something at the last minute, but as of right now, I'm just showing up. Excited to see them do that. But yes.
Yeah, and I just wanted to highlight climate change, and we talked about food all day. I just want to make sure everyone knows that the one thing that's easy to do is to reduce meat and dairy intake.
Yes.
That is so easy, it costs nothing, and you can really make a difference.
So it is so important. In my house, not so easy. And it's me and my husband are in a struggle. This is being videotaped, but I ain't say nothing about him. And the reality is, and I've said this to both, people have come to see consuming meat as a right. And I've had to just keep reminding them, especially black folks, and I'm a black person, I can say, yeah, we didn't all have this much meat 30 years ago. Grandmama just cooked it only on Sundays. She's like, oh, it's about to get good, right? So let's just go back to that. You don't have to give it up 100%. Just go back to Sundays. Go back to family dinners. If we could do that I would be down. So selling veganism, I've been trying much. I've tried it. I used to be like, could we just no red meat? And Sometimes they still do it anyway. I control what the potluck calendar looks like, so there's no space on there for red meat, but you can always add some things, and sometimes people still do. But it just, they don't know, because this year, Earth Day Sunday and Easter are the same day, so they're about to get a lot. I know. So some of my church members are here like, oh Lord, we're going to get an extra helping of vegetarian propaganda in church. But I do think, I mean, one of the big things is how do we just get people to reduce? And reminding people that there was a time where you wasn't eating all that. And on top of that, we could also, let go of the sugar. And, like, there's also a benefit to our health if we can let go. So that, like, I've sort of said to people, what is now? Okay, taste, I'll give you that. Not 100%, but I'm not gonna lie. Tofurkey is not exactly the same. But the benefits we get on the other side are large enough that we should do it. So some of our folks, for instance, for Lent, are giving up meat. They're working on it. It's a beautiful thing. I'm just gonna be happy if at the end of it, they can reduce the total amount, right? So I think, and I said this not just with vegetarianism, being very careful to not force people to go all in. Because if it goes from where I am to where you want me to be, the chance of me getting on that journey is much lower than if you offer me a step, and then another step, and then another step. Sorry, and I know, okay, I'm gonna take 1, 2, 3, because I think I see you.
This is a legit question.
Okay.
Or kind of comment. Well.
All right, so I'm gonna get a couple, and then I'm gonna try to answer them all because I got no minutes left.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
I love you, and I'm grateful for your words and your energy and the message that you've relayed. I do think it is, in the same way we can make individual change,
Yeah.
we still must demand that the structure, if all of us were vegetarian today, vegan today,
Yeah.
the water, the soil, the air, and so while we make these individual changes, demand and change the structures also. So I just wanted to.
Oh, yes. No, I
I
think
know
you're.
you weren't saying that. I just wanted to add that. for
Yes. Okay, so I'll bring in a couple and then I'll say like a closing, but I saw Sister here, and then did you have your hand or did I? It was, okay, I got it. Okay, so we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, and then I'll close out. Okay.
Hi, name's Diane. I'm from Rutgers. I currently serve as co-president of our Asian Student Council. We've, over the past year, we've been trying to have a cultural collaborative of the student councils. So at Rutgers, there's 26% of the student population identify as with Asian heritage, 13% are Latinx, 7.3-ish are Black, and that number has been decreasing a lot, and that's a story for, that's another part, but and we also are working with the LGBTQ community, so although we are minority members when we stand individually, when we stand together, we do become the majority on campus. And so as co-president, we have general body meetings, and we show up for each other, and a roadblock for me, from this journey so far is that our e-board members, they usually, a lot of the students who take on e-board positions, having to have the privilege to attend university, usually don't have an organizing or background knowledge on social justice, and it takes a lot of work and time to educate or share on one-on-one stuff, especially during general body meetings. And then it just seems to me sometimes kind of like a cycle. Okay, we'll bring up some introductory discussions, and then it just feels like it doesn't get followed up, and then a year goes by or 2 years go by, and then these e-board positions are replaced, and then the cycle continues. So I just wanted to ask you for advice on how student leaders or students in general could where we can start, how we can be more effective with having these discussions.
Yes. Okay. I'm familiar
everything that you said, too, and for your enthusiasm. I am interested in, you are a preacher. You identify yourself as a preacher, a pastor as well. Those are different things. And so I'm interested coming out of, solidly rooted in the Black, cultural tradition of the South, and not being there at this point. How do you envision your role? Because I'm also a sci-fi nut, and so like I've seen 15 versions of that show that you were saying within just this year. Just March, right? So I was excited about that. So I know you know Octavia Butler and all that.
Oh.
So with all of that in the background, bringing it back to you.
Yes.
How do you see in this uncharted, unplanned, unknowable future that we're moving into with all of its hazards and potential pitfalls, how do you see your role, or indeed the role of any spiritual leaders, in particularly, and I'm thinking from the Black experience, how do you see that not only evolving, but how do you see that speaking in either a new way, a fresh way, or a brand new old way, or whatever, to Black folks now? And I say that, placing that also in the context that you come from the AME tradition, right, which for Black folks is a radical Black spiritual tradition. In the white racial frame, it may not be, it may not exist. But I'm thinking specifically about that. Where do you see that going?
Yeah. Okay, so I will try to hold these up. So the first is, yes, I think I can't say enough. Thank you to my sister for raising the question of the need for systemic change. And I think that actually this connects back to what we were saying. So a lot of students see themselves there as individuals on their way to whatever path, right? And I think one of the most important things to figure out how to begin moving is to help them understand that they didn't get there by themselves, right? And so one of the things is to make it very clear that students of color before them struggled for them to even be able to sit in those places. And it wasn't that long ago. Like y'all can look up people who are, in their 30th year anniversary coming back, and they will be able to tell you about the sit-ins that they had to do, about the fights that they had to do, so that you could take a class on Asian American history, because there wasn't one there before. And so I think that disconnect from how they even got there in the first place, imagining themselves as individuals, makes people confused about what their responsibility is to the next generation of folks. You ain't just there to get yourself a degree. You are in a line, and you have to ask yourself the question, what is my responsibility to move this forward? It can't be 17 different issues. So one of the challenges, I love that we are getting more intersectional, but sometimes it means that we're like, no, we can't do that because that's like missing this one. Oh, no, we can't. And so I have been in spaces where people are like, where can we find a campaign that is about disabilities, LGBT, race and economic justice all at the same time? Sometimes it doesn't all present like that, in a perfect way. So I would say, look at what's happening on your campus and get amped about something that's happening right then and there. Because if people are always trying to imagine a perfect campaign down the line, it ain't gonna show up. But one will be there, and if right now the group that is in most danger is the LGBT community, then rally behind, let's figure this out. If the Latinx community is totally outgrown their space and can't get the university to give them anymore, root there. Figure out what's happening in the community right around you. I don't believe there's any chance that some folk of color or LGBT folk are not being damaged right on your campus or right next to your campus, right? Something is happening right now that's a hot mess. You need to figure out what it is and then rally people and recognize that this is part of them continuing the tradition that's before. I think the same thing is partially true for the Black church. The whole prosperity, I'm like, please, y'all, come on. So this is him, a little bit Black church about where we are and where we need to be. My struggle with who knows what will happen. I'm trying to get the church to have some real conversation about full inclusion and affirmation of LGBT folks. So my denomination is very, very progressive on many things and not on this. And so I think this is the question that we also need to ask the church. The Black church comes out of folk who said, I don't care what you say about me, I know what God says about me, and I will stand in opposition to what you say about me, because I know who I am. I don't think we know who we are right now. I don't think we know what we're called to in this moment. And so I would ask them, like, how are we taking it to the next level for what has been laid out for us? We have more privilege than our ancestors ever had. What are we doing with that? And for me, I talk a lot about this particular issue. One of the things I appreciate about the reality of environmental justice, and I talk about ecological justice, and that's because environment is something external to you. Ecology is the system of relationship of living and non-living beings. And we have a problem, not with the environment. The earth is going to be fine. We have a problem with the relationships. And we have a highly parasitic, problematic species, namely us, that is causing a lot of drama. And from a justice perspective that looks at all of the species, we probably don't deserve to stay around. But we're just going to try and get it together and act right, because I don't want to go down. I'm well aware of, like, from the perspective of an ant or a tree or anything else, they're like, we could just get rid of them. The rest of us would be good. It's true. One species would not be okay if we were gone. It's just us, y'all. But, so I think this is a moment to figure out who we are. And I think one of the things that happens in any crisis is that you have to do a deep evaluation of who you is and who you is trying to be so that you can survive. And so I think I look at this as the opportunity for us to have some tough conversation about who we are, about who we need to be, and then find the courage to be who we need to be, because if we don't find that courage, the other option is not so great. And sometimes, unfortunately, let's be honest, all of us need a little pushing and prodding to be like, I knew I needed to adjust this, but now that it's the difference between, like, a place to live and not a place to live, I think I'm going to take this on. So, I think that is true for Black folks all over the place, but it's true for each and every one of us. And it's also true that we have got to imagine government should be a place that reflects the collective desires and needs of us all. Economics should be, and often is, the sum total of our collective willingness to surrender value to a certain kind of system. We have to rewrite those rules based on what we think they should be, not based on what they are. Because I think it's pretty clear that our economic system is bankrupt. I think it's pretty clear, maybe now more than ever, that our government systems have some issues. Not just you. I just read a really great article in the Boston Globe for those who, anybody can read it, but particularly a Jewish writer reflecting on Cohen. And Cohen's recognition that he is the child of a Holocaust survivor, but then helped a racist bigot get into office. Now, unfortunately, it took him going to jail for that to happen. That's sometimes what it is. Sometimes but I think it becomes a moment of reflection, a moment where we ask, okay, here's where I am. Where do I want to be? And so I thank all of you for having the courage to be here. And I myself am already imagining the stories I will tell my great-grandchildren, and I hope they will be great comments to pass on to them about how we chose to live and how we chose to love each other and to face this moment with the creativity, collaboration, and courage required.
Thank you again to Reverend Mariama and to all of our speakers today. We have had a and for all of the speakers to be so generous with that and their time. We are so appreciative, and if we could just give them one more round of applause. I'd also like to give a quick shout out to all of the volunteers who are running around behind the scenes. They've been to our advisors, Gary Dunkowitz and Mara James Todd, thank you for their input throughout the semester and the past year, helping us to build this day.